Hi, and welcome back to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is February 6th. This is the first day of a 2-day article that we're going to read. We're on page 16 in your magazines. Our title is Shinju County, A Journey Through Culture and Nature.
So you may personally have some connection to Shinju County here, or you just may have visited it, or it's just a place in Taiwan. And I think there's a lot of value in using or learning a foreign language about something you already have a base knowledge about. And I was speaking to a person, I will say maybe just a few days ago, and they're a developing English learner. And their English isn't super good, but they're getting to the point where they're becoming more confident. And I asked them, how did they get to the point they're at and what did they find most useful? And they said, because they really like the NBA basketball. And so what they did was did like a deep dive on vocabulary, words, language used in NBA broadcasts.
I think that's a great approach because you learn one field really well and you know more words probably than most native speakers do.
I told him, I promise you, I will use your story all the time because this is something I tell people to do all the time. Yep. But I often don't find a lot of success stories on the other side. It's always me giving this advice. And so I think today's a great opportunity for you, especially if you have some knowledge about Shinju County, to dive into the English here and really use your prior knowledge in your mother language and learn about it in a deeper level in English.
I totally agree. This approach is sometimes called achieving microfluency in a new language. That means you become quite fluent in one area that you're interested in and very familiar with. So you probably wouldn't be able to talk about geography or scientific and technological breakthroughs, but that one area of sports that you love, you can talk about it with authority and fluently. That's called microfluency. And it's really worthwhile to aim for that because once you become microfluent in one area, it's easier to spread it to other areas of interest.
I said the same thing to him. I said, wow, Karen, we are in the same wavelength. I've never heard this term microfluency, and hearing it, I recognize it in myself. There are a number of topics in Chinese I just can't really speak about. I just never needed the reason to learn that vocabulary. I was a little lazy about learning them. But in certain categories, I'm very competent about it. And people are like, wow, your Chinese is so good. And then the conversation shifts and I'm like, I don't know how to say this.
That happened to me with Taiwanese because I went through a whole course, 3 volumes of a book with tapes in Taiwanese, and I learned quite a bit, but I haven't practiced it all. I live in the north and you get by fine on Mandarin. However, if we talk about language learning, I can talk about that in Taiwanese. That's the only thing I think I feel sort of confident in.
So microfluency, is this a hyphenated word? Is it a compound?
I don't know if it's so established right now. I do hyphenate it. It's because I have a friend who's starting a business helping foreigners learn Chinese better. And this is an approach that they use.
Wow.
Microfluency.
What a great word. That's the word of the day for me.
That's right. And then you said that you only have certain associations with Shinju. I will just mention my personal associations with Shinju. I have a bunch of them. They are not very complete, but this is what I have. First of all, as an academic, I think of Tsinghua University and Jiaotong University because when I go there, I often go to conferences in Shinju. So that's one thing. Another one is I have a bunch of relatives on my mother-in-law's side who live in Shinju. So on holidays like Chinese New Year, we often go to visit these relatives in Shinju. So I have a lot of deep impressions and happy memories from this. It's relatives in our family. And another thing is, of course, the science park. So that, I think, has made it really famous, and that for especially Zhubei. So that's one thing we think of first, I think, when we hear Shinju. All right, let's go into our article. Our title again is Shinju County, A Journey Through Culture and Nature. Located in northwest Taiwan, Shinju County is known for its rich Hakka culture, unique dishes, and diverse landscapes. The Hakka people, a Han Chinese minority making up about 20% of Taiwan's population, have preserved their farming, mining, and logging traditions in the region's hilly terrain.
Among the county's key attractions are the historic settlements of Beipu and Guanxi, both of which are easily accessible via Provincial Highway number 3. A hub of Hakka heritage, Beipu features landmarks like the Jiang family ancestral temple and Beipu Old Street. The temple honors generations of the Jiang family and is an excellent example of traditional Hakka architecture. Beipu Old Street, once a center for tea production and coal mining, is now known for its well-preserved historical buildings and local delicacies, including persimmon cakes and taro mooncakes.
Guanxi stands out for its Baroque-inspired buildings along its old street, which are decorated with art porcelain tiles that reflect the wealth and aesthetic tastes of Hakka residents. The town is famous for its traditional Hakka dry noodles, or bantiao, a staple for farmers during long workdays. Visitors can also stop by Angu Noodles, a beloved family-run restaurant that has been serving authentic Hakka noodle dishes for over 60 years.
Beyond its cultural richness, Hsinchu County is also shaped by its natural environment. It is known as the Windy City because of the strong seasonal winds, intensified by its fan-shaped plain, which have a great impact on local life. Residents make use of the winds to produce wind-dried foods such as mifen, rice vermicelli, and dried persimmons, following a traditional method that has been passed down through generations in the region.
Okay, that's the end of part 1. We'll hear part 2 tomorrow. Let's go back to the beginning of part 1. Our title again is Hsinchu County, A Journey Through Culture and Nature. Our first paragraph, located in northwest Taiwan, Hsinchu County is known for its rich Hakka culture, unique dishes, and diverse landscapes. Now, I already mentioned that we have relatives in our family who live in Hsinchu. In addition, my father-in-law's side of the family is Hakka. They came from the mainland, from Guangdong, from a place called Xingning County. So he was a very proud Hakka. He's passed away now. And he would often say, you know, we Hakka people, this and that. So actually, I've heard a lot about Hakka culture over the years and cuisine especially. He was a good cook. So that's another thing where I have a lot of strong associations is Hakka culture.
Wonderful.
The Hakka people, a Han Chinese minority making up about 20% of Taiwan's population, have preserved their farming, mining, and logging traditions in the region's hilly terrain because many Hakkas come from an area of Chinese that is very hilly. And one part of that fact is that they developed a style of singing that carries across valleys because they needed to communicate over large areas of land, and they were valleys, and that would sort of magnify their voices so that they could talk back and forth, and it's actually carried much better by singing. And that's how you develop the tradition of the Hakka mountain song.
So oftentimes, nationalities generally don't need to add the word people. So in the beginning of the sentence here, we have the Hakka people. Usually in English, we'll just say the Chinese, the Spanish, the Italians, and you don't have to add people on there. However, in times where maybe we have a smaller minority group, such as the Hakka here, we add people to help add a little bit more information for people that may not know much about this. And we do this in other ways too. And I want to be clear, my example here is not associating Hakka people with other things, but we do this with animals too. We'll say, my pet monkey, my pet spider. I am not saying that.
No, it just works the same grammatically.
It just, the way they line up is that sometimes we have a monkey and a spider generally aren't spoken of as a pet. And so sometimes we add this additional word for more information. We do this with people here just because there may be people that do not know who the Hakka are, especially if they're unfamiliar with maybe East Asian peoples.
That's right. Okay, so it's giving us some aspects of Hakka culture that have been preserved in the Hsinchu area. First of all is farming, especially tea. I mean, they are known for raising tea. And on the mainland, too, they were generally farmers. And in Hong Kong, too, there's a whole area of new territories where you had Hakkas tending the fields. A lot of that has now been overbuilt. Okay, and mining, I didn't know about that, and logging, but that would go together with farming, at least logging, because you have to cut down trees to farm. And so the area is hilly, and they have to do these things, I think, to get out the resources and to actually make a living.
So the word terrain is a very nice word. It just means landscape. When you see T-E-R-R-A, you're almost certainly talking about the earth.
Okay, our second paragraph.
Among the county's key attractions are the historic settlements of Beipu and Guanxi, both of which are easily accessible via Provincial Highway number 3.
So I'm guessing it's if you're coming from Taipei, it's pretty easy to get there.
So a settlement is a place where people establish a community, especially in a place that had been uninhabited previously. And a provincial highway is the area outside of a capital city. And just as Karen said, if you're coming from Taipei, the capital city, this is going to be from outside there. Provincial also can feel unsophisticated sometimes. It could be used in that way, although that doesn't mean this here.
Okay, a provincial highway is a specific category of highway. It is not a freeway where you can drive a long distance with no stoplights. There are no stoplights there unless you want to get off the freeway. A provincial highway has a very specific definition, how wide it is, and so forth, whether it certainly has stoplights.
Our next sentence, a hub of Hakka heritage, Beipu features landmarks like the Jiang family ancestral temple and Beipu Old Street.
Now, I am going to give you the Chinese for this because I didn't know what they were talking about until I saw the characters. It's pronounced Jiang Shi Jia Miao. That's what it is. So if you're wondering what we're talking about in English, that's what it is. And Old Street is something you find in a lot of the older cities. So like Sanxia, for example, wherever you go, or Shenkeng, they will have an Old Street, and that's where you find a lot of traditional food and crafts and other things. And recently, they've been modernizing them, building them so they still look old-fashioned and historical, but they've got a lot of cultural things that will attract tourists. I really enjoy these old streets.
I do too. I think they're fun little places to visit, and I mean, how many tall glass buildings can you really go look at? I'm more interested in the cultural stuff.
Exactly, and they preserve a lot of the old buildings, and a lot of the architecture. Architecture is very beautiful.
I agree, and the buildings just don't look the same. My hometown of Buffalo actually has a weird history with this. So some of these old streets in some places still exist because there just wasn't enough money to knock them down and redevelop them, or they were uninterested in redeveloping these areas for whatever reason. And then after a certain amount of time had passed, people were like, wow, this part of the city looks very different to the modern areas, and people appreciated that older value and then realized there are tourist dollars to be made here. And that kind of happened in Buffalo. It happens with some old streets in some places. I don't know if that's the case here, but that is how some old streets exist.
That's right. Okay.
All right, our next sentence here. The temple honors generations of the Jiang family and is an excellent example of traditional Hakka architecture.
Which, as we've mentioned earlier, this early Taiwanese architecture is often very beautiful, especially if they restore it, they clean it up, and they repair the parts that are broken or whatever. And there is a reason for this, and that is because after 1949, you had an influx of mainlanders to Taiwan. Many of them believed they would soon be moving back home on the mainland, and so they built often very carelessly and very shoddy because they figured, I'm not going to build a fancy, really durable place because I'm not going to be here very long. Right. So that started a cycle of shoddy building in Taiwan. I'm sorry to say this, but a lot of the buildings were just thrown up because they were assumed to be temporary. But this is from a period when people had already moved and settled here. They were building buildings to be both beautiful and to last.
I love that some of these buildings still exist too, because nothing really puts you in the mind frame of how people used to live than when you're walking through one of these old living spaces. It's great to see it in pictures and great to read about it and all, but walking through a village or an old street, you really get a feel of how life used to be.
And I think that in our modern life, we start to forget that we are just the current outcome of generation after generation of people before us. And these places make you think that, there were a lot of people that lived here before we were here, and they had full lives thinking the same things, having the same happinesses and disappointments as we do now. It just kind of gives you a bigger perspective on the world and humanity.
All right, let's go to our next sentence here. Beipu Old Street, once a center for tea production and coal mining, is now known for its well-preserved historical buildings and local delicacies, including persimmon cakes and taro mooncakes.
Now, I am not a fan of taro mooncakes because they are usually full of sugar. I'll try to avoid sugar. But persimmon cakes are not really cakes at all. They are just dried persimmons, which are very much like dried apricots or dried figs, any kind of dried fruit. My mouth is watering. I just had a fresh persimmon for breakfast. I love persimmons. So if you haven't had any at all, or if you haven't had any recently, why don't you bring some persimmon cakes home? They're delicious.
I will say, I just feel like persimmons should be more popular than they are. I like them. I enjoy them. And I rarely eat them. I don't even know why. I just maybe don't see them, and so they're not at the top of mind. I don't know if it's because they're seasonal. I don't really know. It's something that I would happily eat more of, but I actually don't. Let me ask you about taro in general.
Oh, can we stay with persimmons for a minute?
I know you're hungry.
Yeah. Well, there's an area of the U.S. with lots of wild persimmon trees. And so when it's season, there is a bumper crop of persimmons. But they are not a really well-known or popular fruit in the U.S. in general, but they are in this area, and they make a number of local specialties with persimmon. I think the most famous is persimmon pudding. Look it up, and you'll find, an American take on persimmons.
That's interesting. I did not know about this at all.
Yeah, and they're trying kind of to make it more popular in the U.S. The season doesn't last long, and they don't keep very well, so you have to kind of jump in there when it's season.
Do you avoid taro in general, or is it just taro mooncakes?
I'm okay with taro. It's not my favorite. I find it kind of chalky.
I like it.
Some people love it.
Hot pot and stuff. Oh, let's go.
Some people love it. I can eat it. Not top of my list. Okay, next paragraph. Guanxi stands out for its Baroque-inspired buildings along its old street, which are decorated with art porcelain tiles that reflect the wealth and aesthetic tastes of Hakka residents. So this is a very evocative sentence. Evocative means something that calls up a lot of vivid images in your head and lots of memories and thoughts. So evocative is spelled E-V-O-C-A-T-I-V-E. E-V-O-C-A-T-I-V-E, evocative. This sentence was really evocative for me because it reminds me of a time I just decided I don't get out enough, so I drove to Taoyuan, and I went through the old street there and visited the old buildings and found they're so beautiful. And there were a lot of tourists also admiring them.
The word Baroque here is definitely worth paying attention to. A Baroque-inspired building means it is a very highly decorated building. There are lots of little details. It's not a very simple and plain style. In fact, Baroque style is the opposite of that. It's very easy to look up Baroque music, and you can see it's very dramatic. It has lots of instrumentation. It's not something to listen to or to enjoy if you're looking for something very simple.
Which is in stark contrast to a lot of these concrete rebar buildings that you see in cities that look like they're covered with bathroom tile. They are very plain, honestly not very attractive. They get dirty easily. And then you see these buildings and you think, my goodness, Taiwan really did have a great aesthetic sense and knew how to build. It was just a certain period where it didn't happen.
Aesthetic is a very nice word. It just means the artistic style. It does sound like the word ascetic, A-S-C-E-T-I-C. And this is like a severe self-discipline. This is a different word, but they look very similar. So aesthetic is the artistic style, and an ascetic, this is a person that denies themselves. Think of maybe like a monk that is undergoing some very rigorous training. I will not have this kind of food. I will not enjoy this type of happy thing. I am living a very, very simple life.
Okay. And I will add that it's not just the Hakkas who built beautiful buildings like this. The southern Maine people also did, the people from southern Fujian. All right. And also note that it says wealth. So it was the wealthy people who built those buildings. It's not like everybody had a beautiful building like that, but you could really see how the wealthy people lived back then and wanted to display their wealth. Next sentence, the town is famous for its traditional Hakka dry noodles or bantiao, a staple for farmers during long workdays. And these are really popular all over Taiwan. They are usually wide noodles made of rice, And they're also popular in Vietnamese cooking, where they call it pho. Those are these broad noodles that are made of rice.
A staple food is a primary important food that people will eat on a regular basis. Corn, potatoes, these are staple foods. It sounds just like the word stapler, like holding two pieces of paper together. That's how most people actually see the word, but staple actually is a very old word that just means like basic, essential.
And they're often starchy foods that fill us up easily, and they're not so expensive. Visitors can also stop by Angu Noodles, a beloved family-run restaurant that has been serving authentic Hakka noodle dishes for over 60 years. My mouth is watering again. So the name of the place is Angu Noodles, and I looked up the Chinese characters. And Ang is just the Mandarin phonetic symbol, Ang. It's not a real character. And Gu is just a mouth and the word for old, so it's mainly just a phonetic. Angu also actually means, though, a red turtle, so that's probably where they got the name.
One thing I was thinking about while thinking about Angu noodles was that these local restaurants that are family run are in many ways temporary. I'm thinking of several restaurants that I enjoyed. So I've been in Taiwan close to 20 years now. And I'm thinking about even in just these 20 years, there are several family restaurants that have just closed, not because they were unsuccessful, but because these people have reached retirement age and their children didn't want to carry on the business for whatever reason.
And they died.
and it's very wonderful to have these unique flavors instead of just this big corporate kind of samey food everywhere.
Yes.
And it makes me want to like really latch on to them even more because I don't know how much longer this will be here.
I often have that same question because you will find these really traditional places that are often kind of greasy and not as tidy, but they have really interesting food. And then you find all of these chains of different restaurants that it's the same anywhere you go. And then you actually really value that human touch.
Oh, you really do.
Yeah. Okay.
Our final paragraph, beyond its cultural richness, Hsinchu County is also shaped by its natural environment.
Oh, that's an introduction, but it has not given us any details yet. We have to read the next sentence to know what they're talking about.
It is known as the Windy City because of the strong seasonal winds intensified by its fan-shaped plain, which have a great impact on local life.
Now, this called up two associations in my mind. First, for any American, I would say, and probably Canadians as well, when you hear Windy City, you think of a certain American city.
Yeah, absolutely Chicago. I completely agree with you. Every American would associate Windy City and Chicago.
And if you go near the shore of Lake Michigan in Chicago, man, is it windy.
Yeah.
So it really deserves its name. So Windy City also called up another association for me, but a Taiwanese one. And that's because not long ago, I traveled to Hengchun. I just went there for like a 6-day vacation. I absolutely loved it. But I learned about luo shan feng. Here's another Chinese word. My gosh, is it powerful.
All right, so a plain is mostly flat land, especially leading in towards the ocean. So there's nothing stopping or breaking up the winds as they blow in. And so it really hits you hard.
That's right.
How does this impact the local community? Our next sentence begins, residents make use of the winds to produce wind-dried foods such as mifen, rice vermicelli, and dried persimmons, following a traditional method that has been passed down through generations in the region.
Rice vermicelli is an okay translation because it's quite thin, like Italian wheat vermicelli. But Chris and I think both agree we prefer just calling it rice noodles.
Yeah, I think if you have to use an English word, rice noodles is the way to go. My wife and I never call it anything other than mifen.
Oh, okay. That's right. It's a local food. I want to mention one other food that I have in association with Hsinchu. I mentioned my relatives. Now, I have an aunt in my in-laws' family, and she was just an amazing cook. And so when we went to visit them, she would have a whole line of what looked like ham, but it was actually la rou. It was air-dried pork that she made herself. And so being in Hsinchu, you've got all that wind to make air-dried pork.
Interesting. That is interesting.
Now, while I personally don't eat meat, I truly admired my aunt's skill. She was just amazing. Okay, that's it for today. We're not really done with the story. We're going to hear part 2 tomorrow. Make sure you tune in then. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.